Good morning, everyone. Officially, welcome to Tuesday. It's hard to keep track of the days. So, welcome to Tuesday. Not too many people here right now. I don't know where you are, but you should be here. But Jesse is here, so good morning, Jesse. Kayla's here. Good morning, Kayla. Maybe it's time for a quick pop quiz. Do you think so? Should we do one?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do a quick pop quiz. Open your Microsoft Teams. Open your Microsoft Teams, and I'm going to ask you 3 questions. 3 questions that are very, very easy. Okay? Very easy. If you open Microsoft Teams and send me a message, 3 questions are these. Question number 1. What is your nickname? What's your nickname? What do people call you? Not your regular name, but your nickname. I'm sorry if that's a little personal, but I gotta keep these interesting, right? Question number 2 is, what general subject did we talk about yesterday? What did we talk about? Just in general. You don't have to knock yourself out too much with this. Just give me 2 or 3 words about what we were talking about yesterday. And third question, if you were trapped on a desert island with any teacher at Columbia College, who would you want to be trapped on a desert island with? There is a right answer to this question as well. So, 3 questions. What is your nickname? What did we talk about yesterday? And question number 3, if you were stuck on a deserted island with one instructor from Columbia College, who would it be? And of course, there is a right answer. Good morning.
Hi.
Good morning. All right, we ready to go? Now that we're all here? All right. Let's jump into where we were yesterday, which is, right, stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination, right? So, stereotypes, I think we know. I'm going to beat you over the head with it a little bit, but stereotypes are reduced or simplified characteristics of a group, right? And so we kind of know something about a group of people, and when we see someone who belongs to that group, we kind of, our brains say, hey, I know something about you, right? And again, you might, but also you might not, right? So stereotypes are kind of an informative thing. Usually people don't have a strong emotional feeling about a stereotype, right? So Canadians say sorry all the time, or Canadians say A, although we don't say A very much anymore. We used to. You know, whether that's true or not, people don't have a strong emotional reaction to it. They just kind of know it, and it's whatever. Prejudices come along when people do have a strong emotional attachment, right? When they start to judge things positively or negatively based on the stereotypes that they believe, sometimes due to the personal experiences they've had, but sometimes the way we remember those has to do with our prejudices as well. And then, of course, we can discriminate by acting or not acting on those prejudices, okay? So you can discriminate by doing something, you can discriminate by not doing something, you can discriminate on purpose, or you can discriminate unintentionally or without really knowing it, right? So, and I'll give you an example of that very shortly. We're good with those, yes? 1, 2, 3. Stereotype, prejudice, discrimination. Good. So, oh yeah. So I won't do the dog. I won't do the dog example again, but we've talked about the dog. We started talking yesterday about the idea that sometimes people will express prejudices as if they see them as fact, if they see them as true. Okay, and so, pardon me. So I gave you the example here of model Tess Holliday, who found herself on the cover of Cosmo magazine 3 years ago, I guess. and there was a bit of controversy around it, right? There was some controversy around her being on the cover. And some people were a little confused because her body type is not the same as most women who are on the cover of Cosmo. Some people were happy to see her there. Some people supported her. Some people didn't. Some people, like Piers Morgan, tried to call out the fact that, being excessively overweight can be, can be associated with negative health outcomes, and so he felt the need to kind of criticize the cover for that reason, apparently. And I don't really have, I think, too much more to say about this beyond the fact that, there are negative stereotypes about people who are overweight, right? And so it's very easy for people to criticize them in that way and then try to cover it up by saying, well, that's just a fact. Being overweight is unhealthy, and I don't want you to be unhealthy. And so sometimes it's difficult to judge people's difficult to judge people's intentions. Sometimes people themselves are not aware of what they're kind of, why they're saying what they're saying. But it's worth thinking about this particular prejudice because, again, it is a prejudice, right? And just because we see Tess here is somewhat overweight doesn't really mean we know anything about her, right? We don't know anything about her. Did anyone have any other thoughts on this cover after we talked about it yesterday that you wanted to bring up, or could have to do with the cover, or could have to do with the cover or with, do I have any? No, of course not. It could have to do with the cover or with female standards of beauty or whatever you think.
The writing on the side is a bit funny.
The writing on the side, which one?
The other one.
Why I vetted my wife's affair. I think if you vet your wife's affair, I don't think it's an affair anymore. I think you've pretty much said yes to, I don't know. So that's weird. Is success and illness? Okay. Well, they got to write something every month, right? Anything else that you want to add to this before we leave it for now? Okay. All quiet. Gonna move on. So, yeah. Again, some people feel very comfortable expressing their prejudice towards people who are overweight. And again, it has to do with our stereotypes about people who are overweight and our kind of cultural ideas of beauty here, right? And so, keep in mind that, there are massive industries that are, their whole purpose is to sell you on what's beautiful, right? And so it doesn't matter if it's cosmetics or if it's hair products or makeup, I guess, or cosmetics, surgical procedures, gym memberships, supplements, fancy, keto drinks or whatever it is. All of those industries are kind of predicated or based on the idea that beauty looks a certain way. And if you want to be beautiful, and I think we all kind of do, if you want to be beautiful, you need to do this, right? You need to get a gym membership and, drink these energy drinks and wear this makeup and get this done to your hair and your nails and et cetera, right? And as you can see, there's a lot of money involved here, right? There's a lot of industries that are very committed to selling you on what is beautiful, right? And trying to get you to spend the money in order to be beautiful, right? And shoot, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, there's a lot of industries that are focused on that idea, right? And so there, what I'm saying here is that there are pretty big important businesses that have an interest in convincing us that Tess is not beautiful. Because if that's beautiful, then you don't have to go to the gym, right? You don't have to buy exercise equipment. You don't have to go to yoga. You don't have to do all of that stuff, right? And so a certain kind of picture of beauty requires you to spend a certain money, right? And those industries are trying to convince you that beauty looks like this and that you need to spend money on these things in order to be beautiful, right? So and again, that might not be too much of an issue on its own, but unfortunately, like I said, one of the things about socialization is that we're all exposed to the same messages, right? So here, when we're talking about concepts of beauty in our culture, men are exposed to those ideas, women are exposed to those ideas, but also young people are too, right? And so we're seeing, we've increasingly seen over the last few decades that there's, there are preteen or prepubescent girls who are concerned about their weight, right, and going on diets and things like that. And 10-year-old kids do not need to go on diets, right, unless they're just eating horrible, awful food and they're just not stopping. But I mean, for the average kid, they don't need to be on a diet, right? They don't need to watch their weight. They are growing, right? But again, they absorb these messages anyway, and so girls know from a very young age what they need to be in order to be beautiful, right? And again, that's concerning, right? Because again, they're not, adults struggle with these ideas, but kids certainly aren't equipped to sort them out on their own, right? And again, it's dangerous, right? Kids should not diet, right? But anyway, that's a bit of an aside. I feel like I'm losing track of where I want to go here. Okay, I wanted to share this with you. I'm not going to make you read this article because I am a kind and merciful person, but this is an example of discrimination in action, right? So how do we look at oppression? How do we know that it's happening? Well, we can do studies, right? We can do research projects to see what's happening. So here, these two researchers here, Marianne Bertrand and Sendhil, Mullainathan, I think. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. They did a little scientific experiment called Are Emily and Greg More Employable Than Lakeisha and Jamal? A field experiment on labor market discrimination. So this isn't the only study like this. There's a bunch of studies like it. But this one was published here, as you can see, in September 2004. And here's what these two researchers did, okay? They created a bunch of resumes, okay? All made up, okay? But they look convincingly real resumes, okay? And what they did was they went through the want ads in the paper, people, wanting to hire people, and they sent these resumes out to the job, to these employers, okay? Totally made up resumes, made up names, okay? But they look professional, they look legitimate, okay? Now, on half of the ones that went out, they put a stereotypical white-sounding name, right? Like Emily Walsh or Greg Baker, right? Very white-sounding. On the other half, they put stereotypically black-sounding names. So Jamal Jones or Lakeisha Washington or something like that. These are names that are associated with black people in the U.S. Greg Baker and Emily Walsh are kind of white-sounding names. Okay? And then they kind of waited to see if people would call back to request an interview. Okay? What do you think happened? What do you think was the result of this? Do you think they got equal callbacks for black and white names?
I think Emily and Greg.
Emily and Greg got more? Indeed they did, right? So they sent out all these resumes, again, you know, resumes that were good enough to fool anybody. They looked accurate, but again, they got more callbacks for the people with white names. They tried this in a few different ways. So they were sending boy, I'm having trouble talking this morning. Does someone else want to come up here and teach for a while, and I can take a break? Dunya, or just no? Anybody? Just having a tough time this morning. Let's see. So they did a few different things. They sent resumes to different types of jobs, right? So some were like kitchen dishwashers. Some might have been a little bit, higher paying jobs. So it was kind of throughout the employment spectrum, right? And they also tried it in two cities. They tried it in Chicago and they tried it in Boston. And they found the same thing all the way across the board. In both cities and in kind of every pay scale of occupation, they found that the white resumes were getting the callbacks more often. The black ones, not so much. They varied it a little bit after that. They said, okay, well, when we send two resumes to a place, one with a white sounding name and one with a black sounding name, we gave them kind of the same credentials, okay? The same experience. They changed the details so they don't look exactly the same, but basically these two people are perfectly on the same level. But then they changed it and they made the black person more qualified, okay? So more experience, better credentials, stuff like that. So they increased the credentials and experience on the black sounding resume. What do you think happened? Yeah, it was the same. So the even though the black sounding resumes had better experience or better credentials, the white sounding names still got called back more often. Which is a little shocking, wouldn't you say? There were thousands of resumes that these two researchers sent out, right? So we have a pretty good sample size. It's not just 4 or 5. There were thousands of them sent out. But my question, of course, is what is going on here? What is going on? Is everyone... Whoops. I feel like I'm missing a few slides here, which is interesting. What's going on here? Is everybody a racist? Yeah. Is it? Sort of? I don't know. Like, thousands of resumes went out. Are there just that many people who don't want to hire black Americans? What's happening here? They have this idea, like, about them? Okay. I think you're on the right track. Can you give me a little bit more? Yeah. What's that? Sure. Yeah, just like stereotypes about people who are overweight, there are stereotypes about black Americans, right? They are, for the most part, untrue, right? But they exist, and they've existed for quite a long time, right? Because they're created around the time of slavery back at the beginning of the United States. So they're, those stereotypes are 150 years old at least, maybe more. No, definitely more than that. Maybe 200 years old. So again, we know prejudices are difficult to get rid of. They're sticky. They hang around for a long time. But so what's going on here? Is everyone racist, right? And the researchers would explain this, and they'll say, well, actually, no. Okay. Now, what's happening here is that they're sending out these resumes, and people in human resources or the boss is looking through the resumes, seeing who they should hire, right? They got a big stack, or maybe a little stack, I don't know. And they're looking through these resumes, trying to figure out who should we interview. And what's happening here is that the stereotypes that we've absorbed, whether we believe them or not, whether we think they're true or not, they kind of act like a lens, okay? They act like a little lens. And so the problem is that when these people are looking through the resumes, they're looking at the experience and the credentials, and they're seeing people's names, and they're flip, flip, flip. And when they see someone who is different, or when they see someone with whom stereotypes are associated, those stereotypes kind of flip down like a lens, okay? And then they start seeing that person's experience and credentials through the lens of the stereotypes that they already know. And the problem is that this happens really quickly, right? And it usually happens without our knowledge, right? And so, again, the HR manager might be looking through the resumes, everything's fine, and then suddenly they're looking through these kind of stereotypes that are kind of filtering their perception of this black person's resume, right? And again, it's probably unconscious what's happening here. I'm sure there are a few racists out there, because there always are, but I assume that most of these HR people are not really aware of what they're doing. They're not really aware that they're discriminating. Sometimes this happens again when we have kind of preconceived ideas about people, okay? Let me give you an example. Close your eyes for a second, and I want you to imagine a kindergarten teacher. Kindergarten teacher, okay? Is she a man or a woman? She's a woman, right? And almost everyone, some people will imagine a man, but almost everyone will imagine a woman. Probably maybe a young woman, or maybe sort of a middle-aged woman, but everyone will imagine a woman of some sort, right? Because that's our stereotype of kindergarten teachers, right? That they are women. Did anyone have a male kindergarten teacher? No, I didn't either. I had a male grade 1 teacher, which was very rare, but yeah, they're almost all females. So we have this kind of idea of who this person should be. So imagine here that we're on a hiring committee at Columbia College, because we're going to start a kindergarten here. So we've got grade 11 and 12, and we're going to start from kindergarten and work our way up. So we're going to start a kindergarten. We have to hire a kindergarten teacher. And imagine we're doing the same thing, okay? We're flipping through resumes of people, trying to figure out who we're going to call in for an interview. And as you might imagine, we'll probably have lots of women applying for the job, right? Flipping through, okay. And then we come across the resume of a male kindergarten teacher. And what will probably happen for most people is that they'll be like, that's weird. Why does this guy want to teach kindergarten? What's his deal? Is he gay? Is he a pedophile? Is he just like, why does he want to do this, right? This is really weird, right? And suddenly, and again, I'm not trying to point the finger at male kindergarten teachers here, but all of a sudden your mind is turning, right? Because you expect young women in this position, and then you've got this young man, or maybe not young man, but you've got this man, and all of a sudden you're like, what's going on? Why is he applying? Is there something weird about him? Or is he cool? I don't know. Do we want a male kindergarten teacher? Would parents be okay with that? And you're suddenly seeing his resume through the eyes of all of these stereotypes, right? We have a stereotype about kindergarten teacher, and he doesn't fit, right? He's different. And so all of a sudden, we're looking a little more closely at his resume, right? We're trying to interpret. We're like, oh, he went to this school, and he was only there for a year and a half. I wonder why, right? And we're scrutinizing his experience more in a way that we didn't really with the female candidates, right? So all of a sudden, what we kind of think we know, or what we expect to see, kind of gets in the way of what we're trying to look at, right? And so here, it's happening in terms of the stereotypes we have about Black Americans, right? And so that's kind of getting in the way of being able to see the resume objectively. And again, I don't think it's happening consciously, right? I think if we were all on the hiring committee for the kindergarten teacher, I think a lot of that would happen for us too, right? We'd see a male kindergarten teacher and we'd be like, what's up with this guy, right? And again, I don't know what you would think, but I think you'd stop for a second, right? And you'd be like, what's going on, right? And then you start seeing his resume and his experience through a different lens, right, than all of the other applicants. And so this happens, right? And this is kind of how discrimination can occur even without being intentional, right? Yes, I'm sure there's some people who don't want to hire black Americans. They're racists, right? And I'm sure there's not many of them in this sample, but I'm sure there's a few. But I think that most people probably aren't aware of their bias, right? They're not aware of their socialization, and they're not aware of when that socialization is affecting how they're seeing things and how they're making decisions, right? Again, it's just like a virus or malware in your computer, right? You're never sure when it's running. You're not sure if it's what it's doing. You're not sure if it's really slowing down your computer or not. You don't know, right? Unless you do the virus scan, you usually can't tell, right? And so these kind of ideas work the same way. They're operating under the surface. We're not usually aware of them. And sometimes they shape our decisions in ways that we're not really aware of either. Right? Does that make sense? Kind of weird though, hey? And in fact, some places have actually gone so far as to, they actually remove the names from resumes. So when they go to hire someone, they're just looking at their credentials and experience. You can't tell what their name is. You don't know their gender. You don't know their race or ethnicity or anything like that. All you have is the experience and the credentials in front of you. You might ask yourself, why don't the white names get seen through a filter, right? Why don't we see the white names through some kind of filter? And the reason is that, and we haven't quite gotten to this, but I'll introduce it here. The idea is that the dominant group is usually seen as the normal one, okay? The normal, the default, the one that's not different, right? It's the one you expect, right? And so for white people just get to be seen as people, right? They don't get to be seen through the lens of stereotype, right? And again, I'm not saying that this is right or good, I'm just saying that this is how it works, right? So in a country like Canada here that is, not mostly, but sort of controlled by white Europeans, yeah, being white is, you are in the dominant group, and so you are normal, right? You are the default, right? You don't have to be seen as something other, right? We have African Americans, right? We have Asian Americans. We have South Asian Americans. Do we have Caucasian Americans? You ever heard that? Nobody says that. White Americans? Not really. We just say Americans, right? Because the white ones are the default ones, right? They don't need to be classified as something different, right? Does that make sense? We'll see a little bit more of that as we go forward. But yeah, so in this case, black resumes get seen through a filter of stereotype. White ones don't, right? They don't trigger any stereotypes, and so those resumes just get seen as they are. Okay? Let me ask you a question. It may sound like an easy question, but maybe it's not. Here's former President Barack Obama. Is he black or is he white?
His mother is white and his father is white.
Mother's white, father's black, right? But what about Barack here? Nobody wants to answer. It's okay, you can answer.
Confusing.
Why is it confusing?
Because if he's a half and half, then he's half black, white.
Yes, technically true. He's a some people might say he's mixed race. What's that? It's more about his dad? How so? Right. 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 Yeah. So in some cultures and even in our culture here in Canada, yeah, sometimes the male side of the family is sort of more important, and so you associate your ancestry more with your father's side of the family. So we could talk about that in saying that Barack's father is black, right? But what would you say?
I thought he was black before I knew he was not black.
You thought he was black because.
Before I knew he was Hong Kong.
Oh, okay. Okay, you thought he was black. He certainly has presented himself to Americans as a black man, right? That's, whatever if I don't know if you want to get into, his skin tone, is it dark enough or light or whatever, but he certainly presented himself to Americans as a black man, right? Now, the reason I ask you this is not to be, divisive or anything, and really it doesn't matter what color of, what color skin that this man has, but I ask you because a psychologist did an interesting experiment with Barack Obama. And what he did was he rounded up a bunch of college students for a psychological study and he showed them a bunch of pictures of Barack Obama and said, which one do you think is like the best representation of who you think Barack Obama is? Okay, so it's a bunch of pictures that they pulled from various places. And what the researcher did was sort of edited the photos a little bit so that in some photos his skin appeared a little bit darker than it actually is, and in some photos it appeared just a little bit lighter than it normally is. So not excessively, right? You wouldn't look at it and say, oh my gosh, that's not what he looks like, right? So they just moved it a little bit one way or the other just to make him appear a little bit lighter, a little bit darker than his actual skin tone. And so he asked these students, okay, which picture do you think best represents him? And an interesting thing happened. First of all, what he found was that, so this kind of just describes the study. What they found, Eugene Caruso is the guy who did the study. What he found was that people were more likely to see him as light-skinned if they liked him and if they kind of agreed with his policies. So in the States we have Republicans and Democrats. Barack Obama here is a Democrat. So other Democratic students, other liberal students, were more likely to see him as lighter skinned than he actually is. People who opposed his policies, so students who were Republicans, they were more likely to see him as darker skinned, which is kind of weird, right? Because what's happening here, well, depending on sort of whether you see this person as part of your group or not, you actually see him differently, right? And Eugene Caruso says that in the United States there's a positive association with whiteness and lightness, right? And a negative association with darkness, with darker skin. And so people who disagree with Barack Obama and don't like him very much are more likely to see him as darker skinned. And people who like him and agree with his policies are more likely to see him as lighter skinned, which is bizarre, right? Because the man is only one color, right? He's not whatever color his skin is, he's not a chameleon, right? He doesn't keep changing. But this actually changed people's reality, right? People actually saw him different depending on whether they agreed with his policies or disagreed. Bizarre, right? Because again, I think we can all agree the man is only one color, right? Whatever color his skin is, he's only one color. But how you think of him affects how you see him. Literally. which is bizarre, right? Is that surprising? It's too bad I know about this because I would have liked to have done this. Not that I had the opportunity to, but I would have liked to have done this, participated in this study just to see if it worked for me, because I like him and I agree with most of his policies. I kind of miss him now that we've, Joe Biden's kind of and Trump was a bit of that was a long haul. So I do kind of miss Barack Obama here, but I'm curious to know if I would have chosen a lighter photo of him as well. I don't know, right? Again, a lot of this stuff, well, not a lot, this is happening unconsciously, right? People being tested for this don't know that this is what they're being tested for, right? That's part of how psychological studies work. You never really know what they're trying to figure out, and so that keeps you from trying to influence the results one way or the other. But yeah, I assume that these students are not racists, right? I assume they're not, out to sort of, maliciously say one thing or another. But again, they choose different pictures based on whether they agree with him or not. And again, underlying that is this kind of stereotype about whiteness or lightness being good and darkness being bad, right? And again, I'm not saying that that's right or good. I'm just saying that that's what these ideas are. Right? Bizarre, very bizarre. Now, the other thing we'll talk about here that we need to talk about before we move on is the concept of privilege. And I wanted to ask you, what does that word mean to you? What does privilege mean to you? We've all heard this word, yes? No? Okay. Can you use it in a sentence? Dunia's like, what is privilege? There's my there's my sentence.
I mean, it's benefits, or it's like unequal.
Okay, benefits or unequal.
Maybe like sometimes rights, or just like some things that are unequal between people due to something.
Right.
Maybe it could be.
Yeah, like benefits or rights that some people have but other people don't. Right? Does that make sense? What does it say there, Dunia?
A special right, advantage, or immunity, granted, or available only to particular persons or groups.
Yeah. So a special right or an ability or access to something that some people get and other people don't, right? And I think that's probably the context in which we've all heard that word, right? If staying out late is a privilege, and if you don't make it home by your curfew, then you'll lose that privilege, right? And you'll have to come home earlier or something, right? I don't know. Maybe, have your parents ever said that? Something like that? Some version of that sort of thing. Yeah, so often we associate privilege with, our parents. Our parents kind of let us do things, right? But it's not a right. They can kind of take it away, right? They can loan us the car or let us stay out late or whatever it is. But if we, don't fulfill our responsibilities, they can take that thing away, right? And in kind of a social justice concept here, it's the same thing, right? Is that some people have privilege, although we don't say privileges for some reason, we just say privilege in a singular. And it means very much the same thing, is that some people have opportunities and resources and the ability to do things that others do not, okay? And it can be a bit of a tricky concept for some people, but that's okay, because we're gonna figure it out. I have something for us to read, and it's a very short article. It's a mostly short article, and it's one that gets read quite a bit, okay? And so I think it's dated to 1988.
Whoa.
Yeah, like the Stone Age, right? Dinosaurs still roamed the earth. I think it's dated to 1988, and I think it was kind of one of the earliest, sort of papers in terms of social justice that got people talking about this idea of privilege. And now we're having all kinds of conversations about privilege, but this was a very early one. It's not perfect. It's not perfect in terms of how it's written. Um, her she has kind of an analogy or a metaphor that I find is not perfectly. I don't think it's that great, but still the article has a lot of good stuff in it, and it's worth reading, even if I'm, you know, so on how she did this article. It's called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Does anyone know what a knapsack is? We don't really call these.
Not like to bring something, right? Like what they use back then, like you wrap up the stuff in a cloth and you tie it and you just carry it.
Oh, that thing. Like you see, like hobos and people doing, right?
I'm not too sure.
I'm not sure if that's what that is either, but knapsacks are backpacks.
Oh.
Okay. So I don't know if it came from there originally, Eunice, or not, but that's what a knapsack is a backpack. And so she's kind of comparing privilege to like an invisible backpack, and you have stuff in that backpack. That's her analogy. Again, I don't know if it's the best analogy. Maybe I will. Uh, I have a slightly different analogy that maybe I'll give you once we've read it, and maybe that'll be easier, or maybe it won't. I don't know. But yeah, what I'd like to do is read it and then just answer a few questions. And so, again, number one, what does it mean to have privilege? Which I think we're halfway there to that answer already because we know what the word means. How does privilege benefit those in the dominant group? There should be a question mark at the end of that. I apologize. So how does it benefit people in the dominant group, and how does it negatively affect those in minoritized groups? Okay. Number three, if you have privilege, are you doing something wrong? Is that like tisk tisk? On the other hand, can privilege be a good thing? Okay. And can you think of a way in which you have privilege, you yourself? Okay? So, yeah, short article. I think it's a fairly easy read. And maybe I'll just give you one little piece of information before you start reading. Peggy McIntosh here was in women's studies. Okay? So she was kind of writing this article saying that, you know, she was thinking about women's studies and the inequality between men and women. So she was thinking about male privilege, right? So the power and rights and abilities that men have that women don't have. So she was thinking of that, but then she started thinking about privilege with regard to race, and that's what she wrote about. Okay, so you'll hear her talk a little bit about gender stuff and men and women. That's kind of what she normally does, but then she's like, oh, but then I started thinking about it this way, and that's what the article is about. Her thinking about the privilege she has as a white woman. Okay? So, I'm going to put some time on the clock. I'll let you start reading, and then we'll see how it goes, okay? Of course, the article is in Microsoft Teams, as you probably guessed. But yeah, I'll turn you loose and let you start reading. Sorry about that joke earlier. Okay, hardworking people. Want to take a little break? Yeah, okay. Let's do it. Take a 10-minute break, and then when we come back, I'll give you a little more time to pick through this, and then we'll talk about it, okay? Okay, people, we are back. I know you need a little bit more time, so I'm going to give you about 4 more minutes. I'm going to give you 4 more minutes to finish, and then we'll talk about some of these questions. Okay? So 4 minutes, and we'll talk. maybe one more minute. One more minute, and then we'll talk. Okay, so a few questions here. I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts because some of these are kind of a little more open-ended questions than the others. I asked you this before, but I'll ask you again. How would you describe this? What do you think it means to have privilege?
Having special rights, advantages, or
Yeah, having special rights, advantages, or benefits. So really not that different than our original definition of it, right? So it's not so much the definition, but I think kind of the expression of what it means in a social justice kind of context, which is different, right? And fortunately, one of the things that I like about this article is that Peggy has listed, 30 or 40 or however many there are. She's listed a bunch of different ways in which someone can be privileged, right? And a lot of those things, a lot of the ways in which someone can have privilege are ways that you probably wouldn't even notice or wouldn't even think about if you had them, right? And that's kind of the interesting thing about privilege is that you often, when you have it, you often don't notice it, but when you don't have it, you do. And so people who have privilege, people in the dominant group are kind of least likely to kind of understand this concept. People in minoritized groups have a better grasp usually. How does privilege benefit those in a dominant group? Yeah. Good.
yeah, I think so to answer.
Yeah. Well, anyone can speak up. There's not hundreds of us in here, so if you want to say something, just call it out. Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't really like read like the article. I kind of wrote my own answer.
Okay.
How does privilege benefit those in the dominant group? They can get special treatment from others, can voice out opinions and freely and be heard, might be able to get away from mistakes easier, and less or may not be looked down on.
Ah, okay. So that's all really good. There's a lot of things in there. So you might have certain advantages or benefits. What else did you say?
Can voice out opinions freely and be heard.
Yeah, you can feel comfortable voicing your opinions and feeling that people will actually listen to you. What else did you say?
Might be able to get away from mistakes easier.
Right. If you make a mistake, you might actually be able to fix it easier or maybe not suffer the consequences quite so much.
Like the BLM thing.
Yeah?
The black, they just assumed that the black guy was at fault, right?
Right.
And the white cops, like, I think they got like special treatment. Like they weren't like brutally punished for murdering the black guy.
Well, the U.S. doesn't usually brutally punish people, but he's going to be in jail for a while. There's always, in a murder trial like that, there's always people who think that it wasn't enough, like the person should go to jail longer. And I actually don't remember what his sentence was, but anyway, okay, good. What else did you have?
Less or may not be looked down on. Like people look up to you or like.
Yeah, you won't be looked down on, or maybe people will have respect for you more easily. Maybe, yeah, okay. Anything, or that was it? That was your list?
That's for the privilege for the dominant.
Good. So yeah, those are all very very useful and very good, right? What else did you say for this one? People of the class. How else does it benefit the dominant group? That's okay. I'm thinking here. One of the other things that I said that Peggy's analogy here of the knapsack, I don't think is quite perfect. One of the things that I think, one of the things, one of the ways I like to imagine it, imagine privilege working, is you guys have seen the Marvel movies, right? Avengers, Iron Man, yeah, seen it. And you know how Iron Man inside his helmet, he's got that little heads-up display, and so he kind of has his helmet on, and it's kind of scanning everything, and there's all sorts of data coming up, and that's kind of one way that I imagine privilege, right? Is that people are walking around basically with their own little heads-up display, but it's happening subconsciously, right? And so people are kind of, looking at other people on the street, and the brain is kind of popping up all those ideas about people, right? Who these people are. We try to figure other people out. And so I think that when you have privilege, the less comes up for you, right? And so if you belong to a racial or an ethnic minority or a gender or a sexual minority or something, there's kind of more data that comes up when people scan you, sort of thing. There's more stuff, right? There's more stereotypes and information and beliefs and opinions. But when they scan someone in the dominant group, not as much comes up, right? There's just, they see them more as just a person, as a unique person. But the kind of further out you are, the more in a minoritized group you are, the more kind of stuff pops up, right? And people are kind of seeing you through all of that data or all those things that they know about you. Where I think this analogy does work is, imagine if you guys have seen James Bond movies, right? And you know how James Bond always winds up at these like super rich, fancy parties, right? He's in his tuxedo and he walks in looking cool and he orders his vodka martini and he just kind of cruises through the crowd of all these like super rich people, and he kind of fits in there, right? He kind of knows how to exist in that environment, right? And that's kind of where the invisible knapsack thing works, I think, because I think most of us going into an environment like that would not really know how to behave, right? Because there's all these super rich people, they kind of have their own culture and their own topics of conversation and way of interacting with each other, and I think we would all have trouble doing that, right? We don't just have the knowledge, and we don't really know the social norms, of the super elite rich, right? But James Bond can go in there and cruises through and he can be cool, right? Whereas I think most of us would not be that cool, right? People would know very quickly that we didn't belong there, right? And that would be a good example of privilege too, is that we don't really know the sort of behaviors and norms and how to kind of interact with people in that social group, right? And so it might be a little bit difficult for us to do so. But of course, James Bond understands and he knows how to exist in that environment. So I kind of think of privilege two ways, right? As kind of how people see us, but also kind of knowing how to behave and act in certain situations. Let me ask you, I just want to jump ahead to number 3 here for a second. No, I don't. I want to jump ahead to number 5. So, can you think of ways in which you are privileged, either here or in your home country? Are there ways in which you have privilege? Yeah? No? Maybe? What do you think?
People say that like in my culture it's like girls can do this and that
Right.
because men get attracted to them,
Right?
but it's actually men that are the ones that are looking.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, like it's not like all of them. I'm not like specifically saying that all of them are like that, but most of them are like that. I mean, they're putting up for, I don't know, they won't do that. But it's actually, if they don't do that, everybody do their own thing, nobody gets hurt, you know?
Okay.
I feel like it's unequal for the girls, but some of them, they don't follow it, but it depends, like, in which area are you in.
Okay.
But I feel like it's not fair for the girls, where they can't do things that they want because they're thinking of the guy that you, I don't know, it's so like complicated.
Right. Okay, so yeah, so it's the idea. Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, because you were kind of speaking
Yeah.
very vaguely, but I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
So the idea that, you know, there are certain things that women can or should do, and certain things that they can't or shouldn't do.
Yeah.
But some women, of course, want to sort of break those rules and do those things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're worried about how men will perceive them.
Yeah, they're thinking about that.
Yeah.
But which they shouldn't be, like, because I don't know where every like the man is different than the woman, so it's obvious, you know.
Yeah.
So obviously they're different, but they're still like human, you know.
Yeah.
Everybody's supposed whatever they like, whatever they feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and it.
Where like in my country, like and actually like in my religion, it's like, oh, people don't do this
Yeah.
because they would get this problem.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make sense, you know?
It doesn't. Yeah, and what you're saying, I think, is very accurate, right? So women are in the minoritized group in basically all societies, right? And often what we find is that there are more restrictions, right? More rules about what women can and can't do and shouldn't do. And again, that there seems to be more pressure to follow the rules as well, right? Men seem to be seems to be much easier for them to break the rules, or if they break the rules, the punishments are kind of, oh well, you know how guys are, kind of thing, and it gets written off. But when a woman breaks the rule, it's a big deal, and people seem to have a strong reaction to it, right? And that's part of it as well, right? Is that people and I think that connects to your point too, Eunice, is that people in the dominant group can move on from mistakes, right? They can do something wrong, they can break a rule, a social rule, and they tend to get the benefit of the doubt, right? It's like, okay, well, yeah, oh, they were just having a bad day, right? Whereas people in the minoritized group are more likely to, you know, suffer the consequences of it, and sometimes to have it sort of ascribed to their social group, right? It's, oh, you know, women, they're always like this.
And they let this idea like grow with them, you know, from they're little until they grow up, and then it just makes them feel always the same. I don't know.
For women, you mean?
Hmm?
For women, you mean? Or men?
For women, yeah.
Okay.
Like pretty much, yeah. But not all of them.
Yeah.
But mostly all of them.
Well, and that's, yeah, and what you're talking about there is socialization, right? We start absorbing these ideas about, and we'll talk about that shortly, but what men are and what men are supposed to be and what women are and women are supposed to be. And it's hard to go against those ideas, right? It's hard for, you know, most people to sort of violate gender norms because they're very powerful, right? They're very powerful. And again, you know, I think I made the joke, well, it wasn't really a joke, but I said earlier, you know, like, what if I wore a dress to school tomorrow, right? And, you know, some people would have probably a strong reaction to that. Would it be hurting anyone? No. Would the universe cease to exist? Certainly not, right? But gender norms are kind of a deep part of culture, right? People have a strong kind of belief in them and hold on them, and to break them is difficult. But it's certainly, well, in some cases it's more difficult for women. In other cases it's more difficult for men, depending on what the rule is. But yeah, I think I think that's correct, right? One of the ways in which you might have privilege and others, or you might have privilege or you might not, right? In terms of your ability to violate those gender rules, right? Or do things that society says are not for you, right? That's good. What else? Other ways in which you're privileged. Yeah,
Specifically me.
sure.
Okay. I guess being the youngest and the only daughter is like, well, for me it is like a privilege, and being like the granddaughter of the owner of the company and like the daughter to the directors in each company.
Right. Okay. So, in sort of like a family way, you think that's, or just because of what your parents do?
Well, being the youngest and only daughter is like, I guess my dad kind of spoiled me, or maybe because of my personality. But if
Okay.
being like the granddaughter of like the owner of the company and like my parents being having like a high position in the company is like, I don't know why people like give me special treatment so much. I feel so bad sometimes, like, and they're like kind of scared of me, like
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that's a good.
they're
That
scared of being like scolded by the boss because they don't want to hurt me, like
right.
stuff.
Yeah, actually, that is a good example, right? Is that in this case, it's not really a social justice kind of thing, but it's the same idea, right? It's the idea that you belong to a social group that is the dominant group in that little, not in society, but in that little kind of group of people, right? And so, because you belong to that group, you have benefits and privileges, right? People treat you differently because of you belonging to that group, right? They treat you better than they might than average
Yeah.
person, right? Which is, yeah, that works, right? That's not a societal wide thing, but it definitely is the same kind of, it's the same kind of pattern. Munadi, what about you?
I don't really know, but like I feel like a little privileged from my mom probably because like during her time she didn't have that much privilege. Like going out was not a restriction, and talking to people was a restriction. For me, I don't have any restrictions.
Right. So, so this is like a gender thing, I guess, right? And
Yeah.
the fact that when your mom was younger, she had, I guess, less privilege, right? There were more restrictions on what women could and couldn't do, but those restrictions are relaxing a little bit, and so you have more of those freedoms than your mom did, right? Yeah. Okay. I'll take that. That works. Edel, what do you think?
I'm not sure if I ever like was privileged. Maybe I was, but I didn't notice it. That's it.
Some of and that's often true, right? Is that, again, often when you have privilege, you don't notice it.
You think it's normal.
Yeah.
So you get shocked when you see that other people get treated differently.
Yeah, it feels normal. We're going to come back to this tomorrow, and Peter, I want to talk to you about this tomorrow too. But I'll just give you two quick examples just to maybe help clarify it. Maybe you can think about it, a little bit later today. One of the examples I already used is, I said when I was younger, when I was a teenager, and I would go into a convenience store, they would watch me all the time, right? And because, again, I was a teenager and teenagers steal stuff, that's the stereotype. And so, yeah, I was scrutinized when I went into the store, right? And I felt it, right? I could feel the store owner or the cashier like watching me all the time, right? Yeah, and it did not feel good, right? But again, I don't notice that I have the privilege now to walk into a store and nobody looks at me, right? I don't notice it because it doesn't happen. But when I was 13 or 14, I did notice it, right? I didn't have that privilege. I didn't have people treating me as if I was, an honest, kind of, normal, non-thieving person, right? Shoot. What was my other example? This was a few years ago when I first moved to Vancouver. I was in North Vancouver waiting for the bus, and a bus drove by. And on the side of the bus was an ad for a realtor, somebody who sold houses. And the entire ad was in Mandarin. So it was the agent was Chinese, and all of their stuff was written was written in Chinese. And I looked at it, and I, for a second, I had this kind of little reaction. I was like, why is it all in Mandarin? Like, is my money no good to you? Like, you don't want to deal with me because I'm not Chinese, so you've just written it all in Mandarin and I can't even read it, and what's this about? And, you know, again, I thought about it after, and I was like, well, I mean, they can cater to whatever market they want, right? I'm not looking to buy a house now, so I don't need to be upset about this. And again, I'm very used to seeing signs in English, right? And so to see one that was like totally excluding me as an entire group, I had a little reaction for a second, right? And I was like, hey, like, why aren't you including me in this, right? Like, why don't you want to do business with me just because I'm not Chinese, right? And again, I'm sure that's not what was going on, but I just had this little reaction, right? And it was almost like a little moment into, oh, I don't have that privilege, right? I was kind of excluded in a way that I wasn't used to being excluded, right? And I felt it, right? I felt it. So again, often you don't feel when you have privilege, but when you don't have it, you suddenly realize, oh, I'm pushing against the current now in a way that I wasn't before. We do have a minute. Peter, do you have a way in which you were?
In my country, no, of course, it's like the vast majority is white people because in Russia, but
Yeah.
And here also, like I don't really notice it. I don't know, maybe like for example, when I was going for to rent like a house,
Yeah.
my landlady, she was Croatian, inside the South European
Yeah.
country, and then like she was very nice, but then like I don't know, maybe it was because I was like also European and we got this bond with them. Who knows? I cannot talk for sure.
Yeah. Good question, right? So, you know, you went to rent an apartment or whatever, and the woman's Croatian, you're Russian. Did that kind of help, right? Did she feel, oh, this, you know, I feel like I know this guy, and so I'll rent to him when I wouldn't have rented to someone else? That's the thing, you don't know, right? Maybe it helped out, right? Maybe she was like, oh yeah, I'll rent to this Russian guy. Maybe it didn't matter to her, but you don't know, right? You never, and that's the thing about privilege, is sometimes you just don't know when it's helping you, right? And it could have helped you, or it could have made no difference at all, but it's tough to know, right? Anyway, jeez. Anyway, that's all the time we have. I went a minute over, and so I apologize. Come back tomorrow. We'll finish up with privilege, and then I think we can move on to ableism. Okay? Don't forget, there's a fire drill today at 1:45. Oh no! So you'll have to go outside, and so keep an eye on the weather in your next block. And if it looks like it's going to rain, maybe grab your jacket before 1:45, so you can go out with it. Okay? Anyway, that's it for today, guys. See you tomorrow. Thank you for your hard work. Yeah, have a nice afternoon.
Goodbye.
Bye.